Hello, Steve Eyes89. Well, I'm continuing my sort of horror franchise marathons, and I recently did a big one. I did The Howling. Now, The Howling was a bit of a problem because I didn't have the fifth film on DVD, and I sort of had watched like the first couple of films, and then I watched the fourth film and the sixth film together, and it just sort of felt wrong. I watched the reboot and that, and I just really wasn't sure what to do. But then I found that YouTube actually had the fifth film. So I decided to do them. Now, the first film is a classic. It's brilliant. It's got Dee Wallace in it. It's got some real atmosphere and story, and Robert Picardo's in it as well. And I just had really good memories of it. Basically, it starts off with a woman in the city, and it's so funny to see the city in the 80s, which I still related to when I first moved to the city, because things are very much the same, but now things are so different. It's funny to look back at these sort of time capsules, which these films that were more contemporary when I first saw them are now sort of becoming sort of vintage and classic. And so she goes to this little porn theatre, like where people go in and pay like $1 to watch a little film in a little booth, to meet this guy who apparently has been killing people and he's agreed to meet her or something. It's a bit sketchy. And of course, it goes awry. The police come to her rescue. They kill him. And then she goes away to a retreat to recover from this because she is traumatized. Like, she tries to go back on screen. She's a TV reporter. She tries to go back on screen and she freezes. So they send her away to this, retreat with therapists and everything. And while she's there, weird things start happening, and this is out in the woods, and there's some atmosphere and some nice scenes where they're not sure what's happening outside with noises. I really enjoyed. I just remember that section of the film and just watching it with the lights off and being really engaged in the atmosphere of it all. Now, what she discovers, of course, is that the whole little colony that this therapist has sort of put together is all werewolves, and he's trying to help coach them how to actually live in the real world. And manage sort of being werewolves. And there's the politics of that, where some people are like, no, we should kill humans like we always have. And he's like, no, we need to actually manage ourselves differently so we can coexist with them. It's not the Dark Ages, blah, blah, blah. So there's all that. Now, it has a very famous sort of ending where the main character doesn't survive. She gets bitten right at the last minute when they're escaping, and she's like, I have to tell the world what's happening. So she turns into a werewolf live on air. And then they shoot her live on air. And it's quite a shocking ending, and I think that the ending is like the ending really made the film in some ways. And it's horrible to see Dee Wallace die, but it's funny that when she turns into a werewolf, she looks like a little poodle dog, not like a real werewolf. It's kind of funny. Just the transformation, but the actual scene is really good. So the second film, oh god, it was bad. There's some attempt to continue the story, but they don't use Dee Wallace or the character. I think they've sort of written another character to be just like her, because originally it was supposed to be Dee Wallace, but they couldn't get her or a likeness. So they've got another actress playing another Karen, but it's a different person. So there are people mourning the death, and Christopher Lee shows up because she was killed by a werewolf. She's going to rise, so he's basically waiting to kill her, and then they end up going to another country. I can't remember which it was, and they're trying to find the origins of these werewolves, and it comes back to the Christopher Lee's had some sort of involvement with this like werewolf queen who's sort of it's a mess. It's totally 80s. It's got a lot of 80s rock, a lot of 80s bad fashion, and over the top costume design, and just characters you don't relate to. You don't sort of get, this like the main two characters. The woman is immensely unattractive, and the man is a complete douche. So you're not with them. You don't care about them. You don't care what happens to them. I just found it really like, God, I haven't seen a worse sequel to a horror film or a horror classic as this. I don't think. It's not the production is bad. It's just the whole thing just doesn't work. And then it gets worse somehow. Howling 3, The Marsupials. Oh my god. I when I first saw it, I thought this is the worst horror film I've ever seen. And now looking back at it, I'm like, I think that was on purpose. I think they were trying to make a bad horror film to laugh at, because it's so unbelievably ridiculously over the top and awful. It must have been deliberate, which I didn't get when I was younger. But I mean, I knew that it was made in Australia and it was a big deal at the time. And it's funny because I had never been to Sydney when I watched the original film, but now watching it, I'm recognising all these places in Sydney where they filmed it, and that's just kind of weird. Um, but yeah, it's basically because Australia has marsupials. Apparently, we've sort of bred a weird kind of werewolf that's managed to exist in Australia all these years. And there's a girl who is one of them. This little colony up there, up somewhere. She escapes. She goes to the city. She just stumbles into a movie shoot and becomes a star. And then she meets a guy. He gets her pregnant, and she has the baby. They raise the baby, and then she is getting an Oscar or something, and the lights from the photographers trigger her transformation, and she transforms into a werewolf, like on the Oscars, basically. Mind you, she would have had plenty of red carpet events where she had photography, so it doesn't make any sense. But the whole film is just deliberately awful, and there's even a bad film within the film, which is 10 times as awful as that. And I sort of was laughing more at it this time, so I actually enjoyed it a little bit more than the first time, where I was like, oh, that was awful. Now I'm like, oh, it's meant to be. It's supposed to be ridiculously bad, and they're just making fun of it, which is a bit insulting because they could have made a real horror film. So yeah. So that's that one. Now the fourth film, the last couple of films in this series, it sort of happened with Hellraiser and a few other series where they just sort of write a film, and it's like, or they have a film, they're like, I think we can make this as a Howling film. And this film is very much a ghost story about a couple that goes to a cabin, and one of the woman is sort of haunted by this character, and it is a woman who was killed by a werewolf, and there's werewolves in the town. And it feels like they wrote this story into the franchise. But it's quite a good little story. The sense of isolation is good, but you have a couple, so it's not one person, so it's not as, some of the other films are just too insular. It's just one person. If you don't care about them, you don't care. But also, it's just, yeah. So, I actually enjoyed it. Now, the next film was the one I had never seen, and this is actually probably the best one of the later trilogies. Sequels in this trilogy, at least, and actually all the sequels. A bunch of people are invited to a castle that once basically had a massacre of the family that lived in there, because they were infested with, werewolves. So they tried to kill off the whole line, but a baby escaped. And now they've come back, and they're thinking of turning the castle into a tourist thing. And basically these people have been brought there because one of them is a werewolf, and someone's trying to find out who the werewolf is. So it's a bit of a whodunit. People start disappearing one by one. They're all stuck in the cabin, the castle, when there's a big storm, and they are all knocked off one by one. Eventually you sort of find out who the killer is. So I really enjoyed that one. Now the last one, actually not the last one, because I discovered there's a 7 which I didn't even know about. Part 6, The Freaks. Basically, a werewolf is caught by a travelling circus and put on show as a freak. That's as much as you need to know. It's not bad. It's just not particularly interesting. The actual werewolf that's captured is kind of interesting, but most of the people in the carnival aren't, and they're not very likable. Eventually, the werewolf... I'll leave that. I won't actually ruin it all. But, how these sort of things end up. Transformation, people die, and either the werewolf is sort of saved in some way, or the werewolf is the villain. And so the next film though is another, it's really unexplainable. It's really strange. The whole film is based in this little cowboy town somewhere in America, and so much of the film is just watching the people who live in the town. A lot of them are real people and real musicians and that, performing at this bar. And it's just like watching these people they're always telling jokes and having these weird little scenes, and people performing for like a whole 5-minute set and stuff. And I'm like, it's like they just filmed the town and said, hey, can we film in your town? Hey, let's just film you, let's promote your town or something. It's just really weird. And there is actually a story. One of the characters is actually a werewolf who he was in the 5th film. He was the first person who supposedly died, who just got trapped in the snow and was saved apparently. And someone's trying to blackmail him because they believe he is a werewolf, but someone else in the town is a werewolf, and they're trying to work out who the werewolf is, and there's a lot of backwards and forwards. And again, I won't ruin it in case you haven't seen it, just on the odd chance someone watches this review and then watches the films. but just the nature of it, where they keep showing the town, and you spend all this time watching people just have these little scenes doing their little thing that seem totally unrelated to what's happening in the background, because there's a little bit of people being killed in the background, and a little bit of talk, a little bit of conspiracy about who could it be, a little bit of acting, a little bit of scripting, but the rest, like a good hour of the film, is just watching these people just sitting around the bar talking and playing music and dancing and boot scooting and stuff like that. So it's really weird, but oddly mesmerizing. But yeah. And then the last film technically is a reboot, and I'm just going to look at that separately because it was okay, but I didn't care about it, and I'm just going to watch that separately some other time and review it. I'm probably going to do a review of a bunch of reboots and sort of compare them all, remakes and reboots, because there's a whole bunch of them. But that's my my Howling franchise review, because I've always wanted to watch the whole thing, and now I have.